Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Hello and welcome to the London part of the show. I'm Norman Smith. I'm joined in the studio by Bob Blackman, the Conservative MP for Harrow East, and Clive Efford, Labour MP for Eltham. In a minute, we'll be reflecting on the first anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. But I want to start with the news that Janet Davey has been elected as Labour MP for Lewisham East, taking over from the Labour incumbent Heidi Alexander, who stood down to join the Mayor's team at City Hall. Now, Labour's majority was greatly reduced from 21,000 to 5,500, with the Lib Dems leapfrogging the Conservatives to come second. And I suppose, Clive, the question is, here we are, 8 years in opposition, and yet you, as a party, are actually going backwards.
Well, I think that's a bit rich. I mean,
well, how so? You lost 17% of your share of the vote.
We've got over 52% of the vote yesterday in a by-election where there was nothing exciting going on whatsoever. A third of the people turned out and voted. It was pretty straightforward by-election for Labour.
You should be taking chunks out of the government.
This was our seat, and it's quite common for this to happen in extremely safe seats where there are no controversial issues around, where the incumbent party just sails back in with over 50% of the vote, and that's what we did.
Let me suggest to you there is one controversial issue around, and that's Brexit. And the reason the Labour vote went down is because Mr Corbyn is seen by many Labour supporters, Remain supporters in areas like Lewisham, as a cop-out, a sellout on Brexit. That's your problem. I
think that's unfair on him, but you are right. There was some of that about. I was out there knocking on doors, and there were some people who were saying, look, I want to make a protest about Europe. I feel very strongly that we are doing the wrong thing and we want to stay, and I want the Labour Party to make a stronger case. And I think that's unfortunate, because if you look at the amendment that we voted for, and 240 Labour MPs in total, if you count them all, voted for it this week. That was a very strong message about having access to the internal market, remaining very close to the European Union as we Brexit. So, unfortunately, the impression was given that we weren't in that position because of people who were making a lot of noise about the amendment on the EEA.
And Bob Blackman, surely Clive is right about one thing, and that is people are voting on Brexit now. And whether you like it or not, that shapes all politics and explains your difficulty as a party as well. You may do OK in Brexit-supporting areas, but in former Tory Remain areas, there's no way back for you. And in Lewisham, you actually came third.
Well, obviously, we're disappointed. We always want to win by-elections. We want to win votes. I mean, I think the big story, of course, was that only a third of the people took the time and trouble to vote, which means that all parties failed to connect. Labour, of course, saw their majority slashed in an election. Less people voted in the by-election than voted in the London council elections just a few weeks before. So for all of us as politicians, it's disappointing. We had, as I say, a very good local candidate who worked very hard. And obviously, we would much prefer to have won the election, let alone finish third. For us, though, I think the key point is that we are in the midst of negotiations. We're going through the process in Parliament of getting the EU withdrawal bill through Parliament, through its various stages. Yeah. So there is confusion.
OK, let's leave it there. Now, this week was the anniversary, of course, of the Grenfell Tower fire. 1 year on, the effort to rebuild lives goes on amid recriminations and a desperate need to establish the truth. Bhavani Vadi now reports on the lasting impact of the fire on the community in North Kensington.
It's been a year since the worst fire in the country's post-war history. Munira Mahmood and her family escaped from the 5th floor of Grenfell Tower.
I left with my kids and then my husband followed 15 minutes after, which was the most difficult time for me in my life, you know, thinking the building, the fire is getting worse and worse, and he's not going to be seen. You know, friends, neighbours that we called family, you know. But we blame ourselves for not helping them, but they trusted the authorities that told them stay in, help is coming. They trusted them.
Over the last year, they've been trying to rebuild their lives, despite living in a hotel room. With no access to a kitchen, Munira has been coming to the Al-Manar Muslim Cultural Heritage Centre to cook for her family and has learnt new skills in the process.
I love cooking. I didn't realise it was therapy for me. They've helped me to get my level 2 food and hygiene certificate, and put down my name for management. We have a big dream now for the community, you know, and hopefully one day we'll give something back small to the community.
On the night of the fire, just hours after worshippers had broken their fast for Ramadan there, the mosque reopened to care for survivors and is still offering support.
I think there is an ongoing trauma within the community, which I think will take some time to address. We've identified this right from the beginning, and we have now a counselling service.
The centre, like many other faith organisations and volunteers, was at the forefront of the emergency response after the disaster, filling a void left by the lack of coordination and leadership from the authorities. Notting Hill Methodist Church was one of those organisations, and in the longer term hopes to help rebuild the broken relationship between residents and those in power.
Well, I think obviously the community is still angered by the lack of the official response in those first few dreadful days, of course. It plays into a narrative in this community of feeling let down over many, many years. This is merely the most recent and, of course, clearly by far the most dreadful.
For the bereaved, this week has been about remembrance, but many survivors are still living in limbo. More than half of the households made homeless by the Grenfell fire have yet to move into permanent homes. That means the government and the council have broken their pledge to permanently rehouse survivors by the time of the first anniversary of the disaster. Antonio Roncolato was one of the last people to be rescued from Grenfell Tower after spending 6 hours being trapped in the building. He's waiting for a permanent new home on a ground floor where he has easy access to a fire escape.
We do not want this to happen again because, you know, it's bad enough if someone dies for some reason prematurely or because of this or because of circumstances. But these people did not die, people were killed in there by the hand of human beings, basically, due to their neglect and their incompetence. And this can still happen. There are still plenty of buildings with this cladding, with this lack of fire and health and safety, proper fire regulations, public buildings, hospital, social houses, high-rise building, you name it. So we have to act now.
Kensington and Chelsea Council has committed £235 million to secure more than 300 homes and says that staff are doing everything they can to support survivors in rebuilding their lives. But how can this happen when a year on from the Grenfell tragedy, many of those who suffered the worst have yet to find a place to call home?
Well, joining us now is Elizabeth Campbell from Kensington and Chelsea Council, who took over as leader in the immediate aftermath of the fire. Elizabeth Campbell, your predecessor, when he quit, said he was resigning because of the perceived failings of the council. Now, do you think the failings of the council are perceived or real?
Well, I think we have to wait for the inquiry.
You don't know?
Well, as soon as I took over as leader, the first thing I did was to apologise and to say that actually the council did not cope well enough in the face of an overwhelming national tragedy, and I still hold to that. We obviously didn't cope well enough, but as to the details, that's what the inquiries are for.
But let me put it to you, the failings are not historic in terms of the immediate aftermath, which many people would say the council failed to get a grip on the situation. They're current in terms of your failure to rehouse residents, as you yourself promised to do within a year. Something like half are still in temporary accommodation.
Well, I don't accept that because about 90... Let me just finish. 90% of those who need to be rehoused have accepted permanent accommodation now.
But the accommodation is not available or suitable.
Well, why
are they not in their properties then?
Because it's complicated. It's very complicated and it's difficult, and you know, having been at the commemoration hearings every day, if you've got a family and you've had the opening of the public inquiry, well, the commemoration hearings for 2 weeks, then you have the opening of the public inquiry, you've got Ramadan going on at the same time, and yesterday you had the first anniversary. Meanwhile, children are doing A-levels. When people are ready to move, they'll move, and we are doing everything we can to support them, to help them, to encourage them to take up the flats and properties that are available.
Let me put it to you, the facts are against you. If you have a situation where you have 200 or so households and only 80 or so after a year have been permanently rehoused, how in any way can you be satisfied with that?
I'm not satisfied with it, but I'm saying there are reasons for it. These aren't just figures that you can just move from one side of the sheet to another. They're individuals, and they all have individual reasons. Okay, but I'm saying that, you know, yesterday I was speaking with quite a lot of our staff and the resettlement team, allocation team. We know everybody. We know them very well.
Okay, but let's get a sense then. Here we are 1 year on. Half have not been put in permanent housing. How long do you think will it be before you will be able to ensure all of them are in permanent housing?
Well, I'd just like to pick you up on what you said. You said when they will be put. It's not a question of us putting them in.
You know the thrust of my question. You know the thrust of my question.
Yeah, I do. But I think I don't think it is about having fake deadlines.
But if you're a resident, you want to know when you can expect to move into permanent. That's not an unrealistic ambition.
90% have accepted it.
So when will they actually be in a housing which they can go into?
They will move when they're ready to move.
Or when you can supply housing that is fit to go in, because you will know there has been criticism that much of the housing you have bought is inadequate, requiring repairs, damp, not suitable for people with disabilities, etc., etc.
Again, I think the story is more complicated than you make out. You know, we went out and we bought 307 properties, so everyone would have a choice. Then we have a duty to make sure that those properties are absolutely the best they can be, whether that's from fire regulation, whether that's from gas, whether that's from electricity. If people came to us and said, actually, you know, I don't want to have gas in this flat, we'd say, fine, OK, we'll change it. These are about getting homes for people. It's not just properties.
I understand.
And if people want to say to us, OK, I'd like a new kitchen, or I'd like a different tile, or I want to change that carpet.
You seem to be suggesting that somehow it's the residents who are the problem here. They're being too picky and finicky about what they want.
I haven't said that. I've said that...
You're saying if they want a different kitchen?
I don't think that's being picky. I think if you've lost your home, I think that's fair enough.
All right.
All I'm saying is that we're doing absolutely everything we can to make sure that, you know, having lost everything, that they can have a home that they wish to move into. OK,
but if you are a resident, you would want to have some sort of timeline in which you would feel confident that your family could move into permanent housing. Can you give them any reassurance that by the end of next year or whatever, this will be sorted?
90% have accepted.
Well, you're not answering the question, actually.
I think I am, because you're trying to say that it's their fault.
If I'm a resident, I would want to know when I can move into permanent housing, confident that I'd be able to get into it.
You can move in when your flat's ready. 90% are ready to move into as well. So the flat's there. It's up to us to try and encourage people to support them. You know, having been to the commemoration hearings, having been to the services yesterday, imagine it was you. Imagine you've been married for 30 years and you've lost your wife and you're going out buying, I don't know, towels or things for your flat, and you're moving in on your own. That's quite a difficult...
Let me, Bob Blackman, let me bring you in. I mean, Theresa May, her record too does not stand close examination, does it? Because in the immediate aftermath, she said, don't worry, you will all be permanently rehoused within 3 weeks. I mean, what a preposterous thing to say.
Well, I think Theresa, as Prime Minister, has apologised for...
Not for that, not for that.
She's apologised for her reaction
in the immediate aftermath, but not for misleading residents about when they would be rehoused.
But I do think that we have to then empathise with the survivors of this terrible tragedy. We have to remember that they've lost absolutely everything.
I understand that, but surely there's an obligation...
They walked out in the clothes that they were wearing, and everything else is gone. Now, when you're under those circumstances, I don't think there's any council in the country could have coped with the circumstances.
Do you think Kensington handled it well?
No, I don't think they handled it well, but I don't think any council in the country could have handled it well.
Can I suggest...
What I do think is important, however, is that we've got to give the survivors the appropriate amount of time both to grieve for the ones they've lost and also to get a settled home which they can call home after their recovery. Now, the point is that we can't ask the council or the government to force people to go into homes. But they've got to be offered a home that is suitable for them, that they will then be able to regard as home. So I don't think you can fix times.
All right, but can I suggest to you there is an obligation on political leaders in the aftermath of such a tragedy, to be honest, to be candid with the sort of scale of reconstruction and time that will be involved. And I would suggest to you that Theresa May in effect misled residents by giving them false expectations of when they could expect to be rehoused, and the government has continued to do so. We have quotes from Sajid Javid saying you'll be in by Christmas, and I mean that actually is unfair on the residents.
Well, I think the clear point here is that the most important thing was that properties were being offered by the council and with assistance from the government for those residents to move in. Now, if they felt that those properties were not acceptable to them, they were either in the wrong place or the wrong type, and they've rejected them. I mean, I think the figures are something like 866 offers made by the council to the 203 households.
OK,
if that's the case, a lot of those residents have said, well
it depends what they're being offered, but
it's not acceptable.
OK, let me just bring Clive Efford in. I mean, the response of Jeremy Corbyn too is questionable, isn't it? I mean, he politicised an already utterly devastating and fraught circumstance for the residents by suggesting that somehow this was the consequence of austerity, the fault of the government.
Well, I think that clearly this is, as a result of a local authority that, quite frankly, refused to listen to its local residents. And
but on this question of austerity, Jeremy Corbyn blamed it on austerity.
They're a disenfranchised working class community in a Conservative borough that disregarded them. And there is no getting away from this. This is a council that couldn't even pick up the phones the following day to answer the calls from other local authorities who were offering assistance. I mean, it was a disgraceful state of affairs.
Do you see this?
But just let me finish, because you've made that accusation. And also, the standard of the work that was done on that block, we can only wait for the outcome of the inquiry and the police investigations. But I think we all know what the answer to that is going to be. So I think it's wrong to suggest that Jeremy Corbyn has politicised this.
OK. Let's hear from the local MP for Kensington, Labour's Emma Dent-Coad.
The council has to accept that they can't deal with it. They don't have the capacity to deal with it, and they've made some huge errors. And they must either invite the government in to help them, or the government must send in commissioners now. They need expert help now to deal with this. The council has made some terrible mistakes by buying the wrong kind of housing for the right kind of people. And this has to be dealt with. Otherwise, people will continue to languish in hotels. And trust me, I've been in some of those hotel rooms. You don't want to be in a Premier Inn for a year.
Well, joining us now is James Murray, the Mayor's Deputy Mayor for Housing. James Murray, what on earth has Sadiq Khan been doing? He seems to have been invisible throughout all of this.
So right from day one, Sadiq was down there meeting people affected in the local area, and whilst he was out there meeting people who were affected, his team, me and the other people at City Hall were there helping out with the local council, with the other councillors who were drawn in to help out with the government, and so on. People from City Hall were seconded to help out with the response effort. And over the last year, we've put money into helping Kensington and Chelsea to buy replacement social homes. The Mayor has launched a fund to help local businesses. The Mayor has helped secure an extension for people who are survivors trying to secure indefinite leave to remain. So there's been a lot of ways in which the Mayor has been involved. And the Mayor has also, I think, found it really important to keep up the pressure on the government and the council to make sure they don't continue to let down residents.
OK, Elizabeth Campbell, have you found the assistance of the Mayor's office useful?
Well, I certainly haven't had any personal contact from Sadiq Khan at all, no. But, you know, fair enough.
Well, there we are, James Murray. Here you have the leader of the council on the front line of this issue. Haven't even heard from you.
Well, I don't want to make it too personal here, but
no, it's not personal. It's just, are you actually in contact with them?
Well, Elizabeth and I have had a number of meetings together, and I've had meetings with her and with her cabinet member for housing, both in Kensington Town Hall and at City Hall. Sadiq has been out there being visible right from the very beginning, meeting people, making sure that he's a leader in the local community.
There's a broader issue, isn't there, in terms of tower blocks in London. Why doesn't the Mayor issue some sort of instruction, guidance, ultimatum, call it what you will, to say no more cladding on the side of tower blocks, and that cladding that is there in London should be removed, because at the moment seems a lot of tower blocks have still got this cladding.
So let's be really clear, the difference here between the Mayor's planning policies, which he has responsibility for, and building regulations, which are national regulations. And the Mayor has been absolutely clear that government need to get on and issue new building regulations that people can have full confidence in, to make sure they ban combustible materials, that they say sprinklers should be mandatory over 18 metres, to say let's ban desktop studies. The Mayor's been very clear that building regulations need to be updated by government as quickly as possible to give people that confidence. In the meanwhile, the Mayor has some control over planning policy in London, and what he set out there in publishing his new draft London plan is a way in which planning policy
can you explain this to
higher
me, which
standards of
I
fire safety.
genuinely don't understand. Why have tower blocks got flammable cladding on the side of them? That would seem balmy to me.
And the Mayor's made very clear that he thinks that combustible materials should be banned.
No, but if someone who's involved in housing, can you tell me why on earth is it put on in the first place?
There has been a system of building regulations and building control which has not been fit for purpose for some time. And so what the government needs to do is make sure that all those existing buildings are made safe, and to make sure that building regulations for the future are regulations that we can have full confidence in.
Bob Blackman, we had this review, the Hackett Review, which was published recently, which seems to have caused more confusion than illumination, saying we don't need to get rid of the cladding. The government has to act on this.
Oh, absolutely, and I think both the previous Secretary of State and the current Secretary of State have made clear that the desktop studies are going to be either barred completely or very much minimised in terms of their impact. One of the problems we have to face in these tower blocks is, of course, that the reason for the cladding being put on is because of leakage, and also the fact that these blocks are often very cold. That's one of the reasons why this was put on. Unfortunately, one of the problems here is to assess at what level materials are combustible. And clearly, we've got to look at what the inquiry says and what the outcome is. The regulations, I'm afraid, have been neglected by governments for 20 years or more and need to be completely updated.
Clive Efford, you touched on this a few moments ago, but I want to ask both of you, do you regard what happened at Grenfell as, in effect, a modern morality tale? Well, about how the poor, the disenfranchised are treated by those in power. We haven't got much time.
Yes, I do, and I think in the aftermath of Lakanal and the report from Lakanal, there is no justification for that cladding having been put on that block.
I think we've got to review this to make sure this never happens again, but it could, unfortunately, have happened in any of the boroughs which have these high-rise blocks, and that needs to be put right urgently so that people don't suffer such a terrible fate anywhere ever again.
And Elizabeth, do you think it is, in effect, a modern morality tale?
I think that, as Bob has said, it's something that could happen anywhere. We weren't unique, and we just have to be really open with the inquiry. We need to find out what happened, and we just need to make sure that it never, ever, ever happens to anyone else again.
Well, that's all we have time for. My thanks to Elizabeth and James, and, of course, to Clive and Bob.